farmers bought Garst hybrids. So if you haven't tried us, maybe you should. Because the next thing you know, you're going to see Garst everywhere you look.
Ask about Garst 8344, the new leader in the industry.
You're on TV8, KCCI TV, Des Moines.
For years, the Contras have been operating out of Honduras, for a long while supplied by the U.S. government. But from 1984 to 86, through the Boland Amendment, the Congress forbade the U.S. government to supply those arms. Some other source had to be found.
You believe that Israel is furnishing arms to the Contras,
right,
with the U.S. picking up the bill?
I do believe it, yeah.
What that man, formerly commander of all the Honduran armed forces, believes is that the U.S. and Israel cooked up a scheme to get arms to the Contras, using Honduras as the middleman, though at the time it was against U.S. law.
In the last 10 years, the ungainly contraptions have transported over 1 million critically ill Americans, a lot of times making the difference between life and death. That's the good news. The bad news is that last year, 170 helicopters flew for American hospitals, and 28 of those machines crashed.
That's the most famous historic promenade in all of Paris. And before long, taking its place along with the monuments of Napoleon and the kings of France, there'll be another monument, the Pyramid of Ieoh Ming Pei.
A pyramid in Paris? A 70-foot-high glass pyramid right there in front of the Louvre? If that doesn't shock you, you're just not French.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Harry Reasoner. I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Diane Sawyer. Those stories and Andy Rooney, tonight on 60 Minutes.
Sometimes I wonder if people have a primal, instinctive craving for hamburgers. Something hot, juicy, and so utterly simple that you can eat it with your hands. You can eat it with your hands. I mean, I know people who don't eat burgers, but I'm not sure I trust them.
Wondering what it can do on a dry highway, you're ready for an Audi.
From October 1984 to October 1986, the U.S. government was forbidden by the Congress, by the Boland Amendment, from arming the Contras, the Nicaraguan rebels who want to overthrow the Sandinistas. During that period, did the Reagan White House bring pressure on other countries, like Israel and Honduras, to help keep arms flowing to the Nicaraguan rebels, to do what the Congress had passed a law to prevent the U.S. government from doing? We've obtained some documents that raise serious questions about just such a possibility. Documents known in the arms trade as end-user certificates. They are, in effect, the guarantee of a military official that the weapons his country is buying from another country are destined for the exclusive use of his own armed forces and will not be passed on to other people, other countries. These particular end-user certificates, 4 of them, are on the letterhead of the Honduran Armed Forces. Their headquarters here in the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa. They certify that the Soviet-made arms listed here on them, acquired from the Israeli Ministry of Defense, are for the use only of the Honduran army. But the problem is that the millions of dollars worth of Soviet-made equipment listed on these certificates is just not the kind of equipment used by the Honduran army. That, at least, is what we were assured by General Walter Lopez, the man who commanded the Honduran armed forces from 1984 to 86, at the time those end-use certificates were drawn up.
Here is an end-user certificate, which says that Israel was selling to Honduras 2,000 RPG-7s, rocket-propelled grenades.
Right.
Do the Honduran armed forces use that weapon?
No, we don't use RPG-7. We don't use them.
There's an end-user certificate?
Right.
Israel, Honduras.
Right.
Signed by a man by the name of Ieoh Perez.
Ieoh Perez, yeah.
Director of logistics.
Logistics, right.
You know the man?
Right.
Is that his signature?
That's his signature, yes.
So it's a legitimate piece of paper?
It's gotta be.
Explain.
I don't know. I wouldn't know how to explain it, because I didn't know about it. I'm still, very surprised about it.
Here's another one I think that will surprise you. 4,000 AK-47. Do you use the AK-47 here?
No, we don't. We don't. That gun, is used by the Contras, not the armed forces.
The Contras. That was precisely our point. The principal weapons used by the Contras are those same Soviet-made AK-47 automatic rifles and Soviet RPG-7 rocket launchers. For years, the Contras have been operating mostly out of Honduras, for a long while supplied by the U.S. government. But since 1984, when the Congress forbade the U.S. government to supply those arms, some other source had to be found. What better way of supplying the Contras than by working through Israel and the cooperative Honduran army, which would simply pass them on to the Contras.
The United States cannot do it themselves. They cannot buy the arms themselves and send them down here.
Right.
They need some cat's paw to do it for them.
Or if you want to call it, they need a good ally.
A cutout.
Or cutout, yeah.
Where would Israel get such weapons to sell in the first place? From material like this, huge stocks of Soviet-made weapons captured by Israeli troops from the PLO in the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
You believe that Israel is furnishing arms to the Contras,
right,
with the U.S. picking up the bill?
I do believe it, yeah. Right.
Naturally, we wanted to interview the man who had signed those end-use certificates, the former director of logistics for the Honduran Armed Forces, Colonel Ieoh Perez, but he declined.
A few days later, we got another explanation from Honduran Army officials that they were buying those weapons because they were good and cheap, and because they wanted to train their troops in the type of weapons used by the Sandinista forces of Nicaragua, whom they might one day face in battle. And they showed CBS News, off camera, 1,000 AK-47s sitting in a Honduran Army warehouse.
But military experts tell us that for training for their small army, they would need only a couple of hundred AK-47s, not 4,000. And if they claim they are planning to use them themselves, how does that square with the fact that the U.S. is re-equipping the entire Honduran infantry with U.S.-made M16s? So it would seem an open and shut case, except that the Contras, the people who are supposed to have received those arms, continue to deny it. Until he resigned this week, Adolfo Calero was the major Contra spokesman, and he flatly denies that Israel ever helped the Contras.
Then where do you get the AK-47s? Where do you get the RPG-7s that your men carry? Soviet-made equipment?
Yes, not necessarily Soviet. Could be Polish, Romanian, Eastern Bloc. There's an arms market where you can buy all these things, all this Soviet equipment, and they're available, plentiful.
But not from the Israelis?
Not from the Israelis, no.
Not from the Honduran army?
Not from the Honduran army, no.
We reminded Calero what Contra military commander Enrique Bermudez said on NBC News back in 1984.
We received some weapon from the weapon from that Israeli government took from the PLO in Lebanon.
Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of it, but I am aware of the fact that Enrique does not speak English too well, and that there might have been some kind of a misinterpretation of the question, or maybe he meant otherwise.
But listen again to Enrique Bermudez.
We received some weapon from the weapon from that Israeli government took from the PLO in Lebanon.
Though U.S. officials claim to know nothing of Israel's arms dealings with the Contras, in fact, one top U.S. diplomat here in Central America told us that anyone who believes the Israelis would involve themselves in any kind of military dealings in this part of the world without the okay of the United States simply does not understand the way things operate down here.
to my first-hand knowledge, the Israelis have been assisting all along.
Another American we spoke with was Jack Terrell, a mercenary who spent several months with the Contras in Honduras in 1984 and 85. Currently, he works for an organization opposing aid to the Contras.
When I first arrived at the main Contra base or logistics base in Tegucigalpa, Honduras in November 1984, they had just received shipments of 122 millimeter mortars that came from Israel. This was told to me by their logistics chief, Romano, at the camp.
The Contras logistics chief?
Yes. Secondly, when I met with Adolfo Claro personally, we were discussing supplies, and this was done in November 1984, and he says, we do not have the stuff now. I have 2 ships coming in from Israel in February. You will be given your supplies. And who else are you to believe?
And this operation during the Boland Amendment years, 84 to 86, was run by the CIA?
Sure. And I've been told to leave the camp because the CIA officers are coming in to discuss strategy today. Business was probably better during the Boland Amendment than before or after.
How do you mean?
Black money, operatives running in and out, weapons coming from Brazil, from Israel, from Guatemala, coming from everywhere.
What do you make of the Honduran argument that these AK-47s, these RPG-7s, are just for training purposes, for analysis purposes, for the Honduran army? That's what they say.
You know, it just doesn't make sense.
So you think they're lying?
It's an emphatic lie.
And they're covering for?
The United States government. They're covering for Israel. They're covering up this very close-knit cooperative pact that they have with a lot of governments in this under-the-table waging war against Nicaragua. And I'm not a big fan of the Sandinistas, but it is a concerted effort to deceive a lot of people, including our Congress.
But not only do the Contras deny receiving weapons from Israel, the Israelis are even more emphatic. Israeli Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
Israel did not have, doesn't have any links to the Contras, to money, training, or arms. To the best of my knowledge, and I believe I know, Israel has not given to the Contras, or in the Contras' hands, there is no arms that came from Israel.
Well, Israel has been sending arms to the Contras for a long, long time.
In Israel, we spoke with Professor Benjamin Bet Halami, who has just finished a book on the subject of Israel's military sales abroad. And he says he's certain that Israel has been dealing with the Contras.
Probably going back to the minute or the day when the Contras were founded or started by the CIA. And this goes back probably to 1980 or even 79.
How do you know this to be a fact?
We have U.S. sources that indicate that. We have Israeli sources, we have Sandinista sources, and we have Contra sources. And here in Israel, I don't think that too many people are trying very hard to deny these things.
For instance, in a recent documentary on Israeli television, an Israeli arms dealer said that he had met several times with the Contras to discuss weapons sales.
They asked for light weapons to be able to fight tanks. Those guys also wanted instructors from our country to train them on the spot in small groups on how to use the equipment.
This series of meetings, did it include the CIA?
Yes, the CIA had involvement.
What was their role at the meetings?
I can give you one answer. They kept tabs on the shipments.
We tried here in Israel to learn more about these end-user certificates, but the Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Affairs Ministry declined to talk to us about them or about anything else dealing with arms for Central America. However, an Israeli investigative reporter told us that the Ministry of Defense here did in fact know that the Soviet-made arms they were selling to Honduras would not be used by the Honduran army. But the Israelis felt that they were legally covered by the fiction in these end-use certificates, that those arms would not be passed on to other parties. Why does Israel find it in its interest or necessity to cooperate so with the United States in its military foreign policy?
Basically, Israel could not run for one day as a country without the incredible support from the U.S. And so Israel really does not have much of a choice in this sense. But even if there was a question of a choice, Israel finds itself very often in the role of a willing partner.
Last week here in Tegucigalpa, an impeccable source told us that the Soviet weapons itemized in those end-use certificates were indeed meant for the Contras, that the Honduran military received them, stored them, and is in the process of delivering them to the Contras. But perhaps we should not be surprised by this, for lies like those told by the Israelis, the Hondurans, and the Contras have simply become standard operating procedure in this Contra war.
What was the CIA role in any of this? 4 days ago, we queried them about that, and they promptly responded, the 60-minute story is false and misleading to the American public. The CIA flatly denies any involvement, direct or indirect, in the provision of these or any other arms to the Contras while the Boland Amendment was in effect. How did they know 4 days ago what we were going to report tonight? Perhaps from eavesdropping on our satellite transmissions, or perhaps from an informant. But what about the White House and the National Security Council, home during those years to Oliver North and John Poindexter? The White House spokesman was hardly as unequivocal as the CIA. He told us that U.S. participation in furnishing arms to the Contras during the time the Boland Amendment was in effect is still under investigation.
In 1894, a three-man research agency was created to test electrical wiring. In the decades that followed, it tested and set safety standards for products the world over. Its name, Underwriters Laboratories. Who created Underwriters Laboratories? You're going to be surprised. Your insurance company. We do a lot more than sell insurance.
To high-volume copying demands. Reliability and dependability that put an end to excuses. Konica Top. More than an idea, a reality.
For budget lodging, I call Comfort Inn at this number. For mid-priced lodging, I call Quality Inn at this number. For a luxury room at a Clarion Hotel or even suites, I call this number. Call this number and make the quality choice.
Hospitals these days are in the marketing business as well as the caring business. They're competing for patients to fill empty beds and patients to pay the freight on expensive trauma centers and miracle diagnostic machines. A big marketing tool turns out to be the helicopter. Dropping into crisis situations on Errands of Mercy, it gets the hospital's name favorably and dramatically on local TV news. And it brings back critically ill or injured people who fill the beds and pay the bills. But it's not just a cold money deal. Emergency medical service, EMS helicopters, save lives. In the last 10 years, the ungainly contraptions have transported over 300,000 critically ill Americans, a lot of times making the difference between life and death. That's the good news. The bad news is that last year, 170 helicopters flew for American hospitals, and 28 of those machines crashed.
Helicopters proved themselves in Vietnam. They carried the troops to battle and the wounded back to hospitals. After Vietnam, it seemed logical to use all that experience and all those pilots to save civilian lives. It has worked out this way. A hospital wanting to set up an EMS program contracts with a company that furnishes the helicopters and pilots. Both the hospital and the helicopter operators are trying to hold down costs. It seems to the ex-military pilots who fly the helicopters, they are the odd men out in this equation. They get around $29,000 a year for their nerve-stretching jobs.
Aerovac 2 Scramble, Desert Sam has a 3.
This is Aerovac in Phoenix, Arizona. It's owned by a group of hospitals who contract for 3 helicopters, manned and maintained 24 hours a day. It's one of the busiest services in the country.
4 minutes and 48 seconds from emergency call to takeoff, within the 5-minute limit promised by the EMS helicopter program. The idea is to get the patient from the accident scene to the hospital within an hour, and he'll have a much better chance of living. In the emergency room, they call that hour window the golden hour.
For this patient, that hour is crucial. Head injuries, spinal and spleen injuries need the attention of a trauma center. The patient was first taken by ground ambulance to a hospital that had no trauma center, so Aerovac was called. For the group of hospitals that pays for Aerovac, it means one more trauma patient paying big bills. For this patient, it means proper medical care within an hour.
What the pilot knows, and the nurse and the medic, and the patient probably doesn't know, is that 20% of all medevac operations had an accident last year. That's 3 times the helicopter industry average. And 1986 was not just a bad year. It was like that the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that, and so on. And so far, 1987 doesn't look to be any better.
January 8th, 1987, Greenville, North Carolina. East Care's helicopter crashed, killing all aboard. The pilot, 2 flight nurses, and the 3.5-month-old patient.
It's dead beyond recognition, the bodies as well as the aircraft. The only recognizable part of the aircraft is the tail section.
Although the cause of this accident is still being investigated, there's some indication that a fire broke out on the helicopter. If it was an act of God, it would put this accident in a distinct minority. According to the EMS Pilots Association, 90% of the accidents have been due to pilot error.
There's no quibbling about that figure at all. The outrageous thing is that I think it pretty well outlines where the problem area is, but it certainly hadn't moved anybody to any action.
Willie Dykes was lead pilot for East Care. He, like most EMS pilots, had flown combat missions in Vietnam. After a little more than a year, he walked away from his job at East Care because they refused to add a 4th pilot to rotate the flying schedule. He left just 6 months ago.
And you quit? Yes, I did.
You're scared?
Yep, you're right, Harry Reasoner. I was scared to death.
Well,
how about that? Well, that's it. Did you ever hear a helicopter pilot say that?
Dykes isn't alone in admitting fear. Other EMS pilots around the country say they're afraid they'll crash because they're flying tired. These 3 pilots flew with Aerovac until last November.
I was physically and mentally exhausted, and I resigned because I just didn't want to kill anybody.
Bob McDonald has been flying helicopters for 23 years, including time in Vietnam and Alaska. He says EMS flying compares to combat, in that you never know when you'll be called, where you'll have to fly, or what the conditions will be. The urgency comes from knowing there's a dying patient at the other end.
When those guys are done out there, I want to get some extra hands.
But he says with 3 pilots manning a helicopter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, flying for Aerovac became too dangerous. Jeff Boatman and Fred Reby agreed.
I've had to actually stay at the hospital and stay overnight till the next morning when my next shift came on, you know, because I was so exhausted I couldn't even make it 10 miles home.
Did you ever actually go to sleep while you were flying a mission?
I have. Well, not totally. I mean, I've nodded off.
Fred?
I've nodded off quite a few times.
I've yelled real loud at myself and wiggled my legs back and forth and bit my tongue, bit my lip, bit my cheek, slapped myself. We've had people who've flat fallen asleep, though, at the controls, and the aircraft has gone into unusual attitudes and had to be recovered. And the guy was so tired that when he got back, he laid down on the pad and that they couldn't get him to go back to his room.
I have seen flight crews who refused to take flights or refused to continue to fly because that they did feel that the pilots were too stressed out and too tired to fly safely.
Kathy Cawthorn is a research psychologist in Virginia. She has worked as a consultant for several emergency medical service programs and has studied the effects of stress and fatigue on pilots.
So when an EMS pilot says that he's scared because he's exhausted and that there's a lot of stress in his job and he's going to quit, he's not just being a crybaby?
In many cases, I would say no, probably not. We found that EMS pilots across the board in our survey reported being very tired. They reported that for many of them that their schedules were very, very exhausting, that the schedules really didn't give an adequate amount of recuperation time.
What kind of schedules did you run into that struck you as dangerous?
Quite a few of them struck me as dangerous. For example, some pilots were working 72 hours at a stretch. And I don't know about you, Harry, but I don't think I'd want to get into a helicopter where a pilot had been flying for or had been subject to fly for 72 hours. Another type of schedule that proved to be very stressful were pilots who had been on even just 12-hour shifts for like 7 days at a time and had to rotate from days to night, and then could only expect 3 days off to recuperate before they had to fly again.
And that's the schedule the Aerovac pilots worked. 3 12-hour day shifts, then 3 12-hour night shifts, followed by 3 days off. The pilots who quit say frequent overflying turned their weeks into 60 and 70-hour work weeks. They, along with EMS pilots around the country, say that understaffing is the major safety hazard, that 4 pilots per helicopter should be the minimum standard, allowing pilots to work a 40-hour week to fly rested. Are these pilots just complainers? Not according to John Gallipo, director of the Aviation Safety Institute, a nonprofit organization that monitors safety in the skies.
Is their complaint that staffing is the main problem? Does that have validity?
It has validity. It is a major concern. We had an accident last June in Alabama. The crew had delivered a person to Birmingham, was going back to its home base, and it struck a power line over a river, and all were killed. It turned out that there were only 2 pilots for that operation, a 365-day-a-year operation with only 2 pilots. Now, something has to give when you have that kind of arrangement. I think today the realization is that we have got to have a 4-to-1 ratio. 4 pilots to 1 airplane, as a minimum.
At the moment, 80% of the programs around the country have 3 pilots per helicopter. The remaining 20% are split between 4 pilots per helicopter and, believe it or not, 2 pilots per helicopter. What the pilots find difficult to understand is nurses and medics are only allowed to work 3 12-hour shifts a week, which means 2 to 3 different nurses are working the same shifts as 1 pilot.
The hospital will say to you right up front, the reason we have 6 nurses, 7 nurses per aircraft is because medical care deteriorates if we work them any more than 36 to 40 hours a week.
And if we don't get them there or get them back alive, the program doesn't work.
We asked Larry Cooper about that. Cooper, a pilot himself, runs Aerovac. Aerovac, like most EMS programs around the country, is paid for by the hospital. In Aerovac's case, it costs the parent company almost $5 million a year to keep 3 helicopters fully staffed and on call all the time. Hospitals provide the nurses and medics. The helicopter operator provides the rest.
But you use 3 pilots to cover the same hours that you have 7 flight nurses for. Am I right in that?
It's 6.5 flight nurses. Yes, that's correct.
Twice as many at least. Why?
They're required to be performing duties at all times, whereas the pilots are allowed to rest during their duty day.
The simple act of waiting for a call, the simple act of waiting for the system to be activated can be a very stressful thing, even though they may be stretched out on a bed in the pilot's quarters or maybe sleeping. My colleague in the study is a pilot, and he related it very simply to sleeping with one eye and both ears open. And he says that that's not adequate amounts of rest.
It's the pilot's responsibility to inform his supervisors if he does feel fatigued, if he does feel he has a problem with his ability to cope with the situation on any given day. It's incumbent upon him to recognize that and take himself out of service. And he's never questioned on that.
You wouldn't discipline him for that?
Absolutely not. We encourage it.
You know, there are operators today who say, you don't like flying for me, go ahead and quit. I'll find another Vietnam pilot in a gutter in New Orleans. Okay.
There are outfits like that?
Oh yes. I won't name names, but the point is that these operators feel that the pilots need the job, therefore they will be subservient to the management's wishes and go and fly regardless of the weather.
Almost half of the accidents in the last 10 years have involved bad weather. Like this crash in Oregon last December, where a pilot unqualified for instrument flight ran into a fog bank 5 miles from home and crashed.
Where's the FAA?
They'll probably jerk my license for this, but as far as I'm concerned, the only time the FAA gets involved is in when it becomes a situation that is overwhelming.
The pilots think the Federal Aviation Administration should have separate rules for EMS flying. But at the moment, the FAA regulates EMS flight under the rules of the air taxi business, with one special provision. Pilots can work longer hours than other commercial pilots if they have separate rest quarters when not in the air.
John Gallipo agrees with the pilots on necessary changes. 4 pilots per helicopter, helicopters equipped with proper instruments, and pilots trained to use them. But he doesn't think more government regulation is the answer. He thinks the insurance carriers will dictate the standards for the EMS industry. Otherwise, programs will be unable to get insurance and will be unable to operate.
The true answers to the problem cost money.
An extra pilot costs money, but so do funerals and lawsuits. A lot more than an extra pilot would.
Just a few weeks after pilots Boatman, Reeby, and McDonald quit, Aerovac decided to add a 4th pilot per helicopter. But the majority of EMS programs continue to operate with 3 or less. The answers to all the questions raised in this story can only come from the FAA, but they flatly refuse to be seen or heard on the subject. After probing us in a phone call about what we had found out, they declined to let us film them for the story.
How much longer till we get there?
About 20 minutes.
Anti-lock brakes, internationally patented suspension, uncanny control. Conventional luxury sedans are built to survive accidents. The BMW 528e is built to avoid them.
Let's see if they're okay.
Everybody knows how to do that kick. Health kick, yeah. Whoa! The goodness of milk is a real health kick. Health kick, yeah, milk. You pour a glass of milk real tall, getting calcium and vitamins and loving it all. Looking good. Well, come on, everybody, milk's that kick. Health kick, do that kick. Come on, everybody, do that kick. America's favorite health kick.
60 Minutes, a CBS News weekly magazine, will continue.
Live Tuesday, it's television's hottest, most unpredictable night. Join host Billy Crystal with Whitney Houston, Paul Simon, Stevie Wonder, The Judge, Billy Idol, Dionne Warwick, Janet Jackson, and more. Who will win the music industry's highest honors? The 29th Annual Grammy Award. Live Tuesday.
This is CBS.
Introducing Command from FMC. It's everything a soybean farmer has ever wanted to do to a weed in one convenient package. The only soybean herbicide that kills grasses as well as the major broadleaf weeds without damaging the crop. And it controls weeds all season long because Command is...
You're on TV8, KCCI TV, Des Moines.
His name is Ieoh Pei, and if you happen to be French, what he's doing in Paris these days is downright shocking. Pei is an architect, the Chinese-American architect who's building an addition to that cultural icon in Paris, the Louvre Art Museum. No matter that the president of France said he was the best man in all the world for the job, the French still can't believe that a cultural barbarian, an American, is putting his imprint on the Paris of the picture postcards, the Paris they think only the French can understand. Paris, where the towers aren't just towers, but symbols of French sophistication and style. And where the elegant old buildings are the sacred legacy of days when France was the cultural center of the universe. And as Ieoh Pei found, no building is more sacred than the world's most famous art museum, the 800-year-old Louvre.
The first reaction is just like my own. You can't touch the Louvre. You just cannot touch it. That's it.
Sacrilege.
Well, sacrilege. In fact, when I first presented the idea to the French, by that I mean to the historical monument group, I was sure that I would be kicked out of town.
But don't let Pei's gentle smile and dapper Chinese looks fool you. What he had in store for the Louvre Museum was full of American audacity. Just how audacious is it? Well, take a look at it this way. That's the most famous historic promenade in all of Paris. And before long, taking its place along with the monuments of Napoleon and the kings of France, there'll be another monument, the Pyramid of Ieoh Pei. A pyramid in Paris? A 70-foot-high glass pyramid right there in front of the Louvre? If that doesn't shock you, you're just not French.
I think it's time, absolute time, in the Louvre, in the middle of this famous, of this sacred courtyard. It's a nonsense and an offense.
Do you think your being an American made it worse? The barbarian? I mean, the
Well,
worst
I would
of
say
the
that,
barbarians, right?
In this case, I think being a Chinese-American architect has not hurt. History, you see, is important to them.
Yeah.
And I hope that I was able to convince them that I came from a country with a long history, and I would not take this problem lightly.
The old Chinese ploy, we know.
If the old Chinese ploy helped Ieoh Pei, so did the fact that the Louvre is unbearable unless it's closed, as on the day we were there. When it's open, it's an indoor track for thousands of tourists in running shoes. You know, the 3-minute Louvre, 1 minute at the Mona Lisa, 1 at the Winged Victory, 60 seconds of Venus de Milo, and that's it. They're through. That's why Pei decided that a glass pyramid was the answer for the new entrance to the old museum. He said a pyramid is a simple, soothing shape and will create a reception area full of sunlight and serenity. Just what people need before tackling a vast museum. And that, Pei said back at his home in New York, is what architecture is all about. A harmony of structure and spirit, like music.
We could approach the music of Bach, as an example. Extremely simple. There's always a theme. And there's a certain repetition, but it does not seem like repetition. And endless variety out of a simple theme. And that is the challenge. Same with music, same with architecture.
Ieoh Pei's music is played on skylines around the world, more than 40 major works. One of his favorites, the Atmospheric Center in Boulder, Colorado. The National Gallery of Art, East Wing, Washington, D.C. Boston Museum of Art, West Wing. Outside Boston, the John F. Kennedy Library. Like Bach, the buildings are simple but soaring. American passion, Chinese control. And the sheer number of them is a tribute not only to Pei's astonishingly successful career, but to his equally astonishing comeback. In the 70s, Pei's friends, and especially his enemies, said his career was dead.
A few years ago, in what must be the greatest nightmare an architect can ever have, the windows started coming out of a building that the Ieoh Pei firm had built, the Hancock building in Boston.
Yes, yes.
Was it a nightmare?
It was.
It had to have been humiliating.
It was quite humiliating. Humiliating when people sort of look at you, and architects particularly, very, very sympathetic, you know. That's compassion, but that's not what you need at that time. And
Pei had lost that most Chinese treasure, his pride. 10,000 windows were making a mockery of his legendary perfectionism. But an out-of-court settlement eventually confirmed that Pei was not at fault, that the window manufacturer had made the mistake. Still, for Pei, it was a long way back.
7 years. 7 years of it. And during that period, it was a very difficult period for our firm.
Why?
That was the period where we built no big office buildings for big American corporations.
Did you think your career was over? Ruined?
No, I was too young to think that.
Too young, and as always with Pei, too convinced that all things are possible in America. He was the Mandarin son of a very Mandarin Chinese family who decided in 1935, against his father's wishes, to go to school in the USA. Why?
Well, I went to movies. I used to go to movies every weekend, and most of the movies were American movies, like college movies. There were a lot of football games and people cheering and, cheerleaders. Oh, for that matter, people like Bing Crosby, Dick Powell, Betty Grable. These are the stars of 1930s.
You mean Ieoh Pei came to America in search of Betty Grable and cheerleaders?
No, in search of that lifestyle, which I like. It's a free and easy type of lifestyle. And at the same time, I assume they learned something in the process.
Last summer, Pei was one of the honored Americans at the Statue of Liberty celebration, 32 years after he and his wife Eileen decided to become American citizens. They had little choice. China had become communist. Pei could not go back.
It was in the polo grounds that I was sworn in with 10,000 others. It was a difficult moment for me. We had tears in our eyes. It was a very happy moment, obviously, but at the same time, it's also somewhat tormenting, and it's sort of like cutting the roots, you know. And at that time, I wasn't sure my roots in America was firm enough and deep enough to carry me on. Do you see what I mean?
But Pei became not only American, but the kind of architect Jacqueline Kennedy would turn to for one of those peculiarly American memorials, the John F. Kennedy Library outside Boston. It's a case study in the way an architect uses steel and mortar and glass to capture an idea.
It's been a long time, and it's such a happy day and a beautiful day, and so many people have worked so long to make it happen.
She would say, well, the president, if there's anything that I want this building to reflect his person. And that's as simple as that, but it's an enormous charge. On the one hand, the school children that gave nickels and dimes to this project wanted him to be larger than life. But at the same time, I can't imagine that this be a memorial like the Lincoln Memorial. I can't imagine that. I cannot imagine huge columns, stone and Lincoln 3 or 4 times life size sitting cast in bronze. That's not Kennedy, For better, for worse, the solution isn't that huge space. We created a huge glass enclosure. You know that one. After you've seen the exhibit, the story of the life of John Kennedy, his family, and so on. Very intense, very interesting, very intense. And then you emerge into this big room. There's nothing there in this room. That was my idea. I didn't want anything there. No bust. Mrs. Kennedy said no bust, no statue. She was absolutely right. No bust, no statue. But then you cannot just make an indifferent space. It could have been for anyone. Or first, he was president of the United States. So it's a big American flag. That's done. Now, we still have an empty room. But the emptiness of that room with the big flag is right. Because every visitor, whoever it may be, after they have seen the exhibit, and come out, they don't all have to say he was the greatest man in the world. The individual, the boy and the girl, or the man and the woman, can make up his and her own mind about this man. And the emptiness turned out to be the right solution.
Was that a nervous moment for you when you brought it to her to show her the model?
Well, I was so convinced of it. I guess probably I didn't expect any other reaction except say, yes, this is right. But I have to say that she accepted it right away because it somehow seemed to fit in with her vision, her idea of what John F. Kennedy was.
And that's what Pei's colleagues say he does best, the dreaming, not the drawing. He thinks about a project for months, walks the land, absorbs the mood, and then tells his colleagues what he has in mind, and they begin to draw. Are you offended by a lot of the building you see in America? The buildings being torn down, the ones being put up?
I cannot be offended by that, obviously, not because I built some of them. But I am unhappy about the fact that our society seemed to be much more inclined to build something for a short time and then tear them down. I think this self-disposable society of ours is not conducive to doing good architecture. And this I am unhappy about. Why is Paris so beautiful? Because the buildings were well built. They were built to last. That's the difference. And we don't. And this I regret.
But Pei thought he had a chance to help China avoid that mistake when he was invited back 47 years after he left for America. He was invited to build the Fragrant Hill Hotel. He wanted to help create modern Chinese architecture, something new, something old. But what he got was inefficient crews, bungled construction, and such hopeless management that the day it opened, Mrs. Pei was behind the scenes, inside, making up the beds. But Pei says the whole experience was worth it for one thing. The Chinese had also asked him to build a skyscraper in Peking, which would have overshadowed the Forbidden City, the historic center. He refused, politely, the Chinese way.
After that, it became a law that no tall buildings are to be built within certain radius from Forbidden City.
And that's because of you?
I like to think so, because it happened within the same week. Now, after that, to me, is my greatest achievement and the greatest satisfaction.
That you have kept the center of Peking, old China, safe from high-rises.
Yes, high-rise.
What do you hope the buildings are like in heaven?
Beautiful, exciting to be in, and life will be harmonious within it, and it will give people, heaven has people too, inhabited also, I hope, by angels, that their life will be enriched by it, or by them. And the same applies to this earth. Building on this earth is the same.
We owe it to you. So we invite GM and Ford to follow Chrysler. You know, for 5 years, I've been feeling like the guy who sent invitations to a party and nobody came. Well, somebody finally showed up. GM and Ford decided the time has come to improve their warranties. Chrysler says, welcome to the party. It's good for America. Maybe that's why we haven't heard from the Japanese. Millions of Americans are only getting 2 or 3 year protection. What are they, second-class citizens? We've backed 5 million Chrysler owners with 550 protection. Our quality had to improve, and dramatically. So, the party's over. Chrysler announces the end of 550 and the beginning of 770, the best powertrain protection in the business. 7 years or 70,000 miles on the powertrain,
100,000 miles against outer body rust through on every Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth we build, car, truck, and minivan. Like I said, if you're looking for who builds them best, take a good look at who backs them best.
When investors wanted to reduce the high risk and high tech, Prudential Bates created PruTech 1 and 2.
This has real potential.
Select portfolios built on identifying promising products and companies on the leading edge of scientific frontiers.
This new process is incredible.
A first of its kind for the personal investor and a way to share in the growth available through technologies.
All right, let's go.
If anyone can show you a more advanced approach towards new and better ways to make money, it's Prudential Bates. Rock solid, market wise.
Monday on Newhart, the Loudons go on an adventure.
Joanna, you wanted me to be spontaneous.
Then, it's a Kavanaugh family feud.
This is my side, and that's your side.
When Art Carney guests.
Howdy.
And Cagney and Lacey investigate a heavenly scam.
Sending messages to dead people. She's killing my mother.
Monday.
Next Sunday on CBS, Valerie Bertamelli, Barry Bostwick, Francesca Annis, and Perry King in Judith Kranz's I'll Take Manhattan.
We wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, but Andy Rooney is going to the dogs.
When I was growing up on Partridge Street, there were only 5 or 6 kinds of dogs. There were a lot of collies, some Boston Bulldogs, Fox Terriers, and of course police dogs. They don't like you to call their German Shepherds police dogs at the Westminster Dog Show at Madison Square Garden. You don't like that?
Well, you know, if that's what they know them as long as they don't, you know, that doesn't reflect bad temperament or viciousness or anything like that.
Well, no, a lot of people are afraid of them, but...
Well, that's the reason why some people have them.
Yeah.
There were 129 breeds at the show this year. Dozens I never even heard of.
Briard.
Briard. You're a Briard,
yeah.
Huh? Sound like a cheese.
She's a Puli, a Hungarian sheepdog. Kuvas.
Kuvas. I don't know. Are you a Kuvas? You don't look like a Kuvas.
Oh, Lucy, I'm a Kuvas.
Japanese Akita? Akita. I didn't know the Japanese were even doing dogs now, huh?
That's the Bouvier de Flanders.
Bouvier de Flanders. That's a... Hi there. What's your name?
Cocker Spaniel.
Well, I'm glad to hear of a dog I've heard of. Yes, I've heard of a Cocker Spaniel. There are no mutts at the dog show. Sometimes I wish there were. Some of these dogs are just too fancy. This is a chart for a report we did on dogs 3 years ago. These are the dogs in order of their popularity according to the number of them registered by the American Kennel Club. There are only 2 big changes in the top 10 here this year. The Doberman Pinscher, which was 4th 3 years ago, has dropped all the way down to 11th. That's the good news. The bad news is the Chow, which was 12th 3 years ago, has moved up to 6th this year. I was once bitten by a Chow named Chummy, and I've never felt the same about Chows since. That'll bring us some letters, because it turns out that everyone thinks their breed of dog is the nicest, the smartest, and the best with children.
They're wonderful with children. They're very, very gentle.
Are they bright?
Oh, very, very.
They're excellent with children.
But they're not too good with children.
Oh, they're wonderful.
They're excellent with children when they're brought up with them. They make very good family dogs. They're one of your brightest breeds.
Oh, they don't. But they're mean with children, aren't they?
They are. In fact, I started out with 5 children. I'm down to 2.
They are mean dogs, aren't they? Holy man. I don't know about children, but I ran into 3 mastiffs that were sure nice to me. As Will Rogers, I think it was, always used to say, I never met a dog I didn't like. Of course, Will never met Chummy.
Two weeks ago, we ran a letter that said incorrectly that each Vietnam refugee in this country gets a $700 a month handout. That's simply not true. According to the United States Committee for Refugees, voluntary agencies get a one-time only grant of $560 to help each refugee get started. After that, they're on their own. If they run into hard times, they get assistance on more or less the same basis as any other American. About last week's story on a weapon called the Bradley fighting vehicle, which critics say is unsafe, We got a very unusual admission and were put on very unusual notice by the chairman of FMC, one of the companies that makes the vehicle. He wrote, FMC received an advance warning of your accusations and misstatements when we picked up your rehearsal on a satellite dish. Let me assure you we will make every effort to continue this type of surveillance if appropriate. We also heard from Congressman Denny Smith of Oregon, who wrote, sometimes your programs have forced the government to act to right a wrong. In this case, I wouldn't hold my breath. Many congressmen just lack the guts or stamina to take on the Pentagon bureaucracy. Our story about the 36-hour day put in by hospital interns and residents brought a slew of letters, most of them from doctors. One of them wrote, the senior physician who spoke for the hospital made me want to gag. A doctor in training cannot learn well when he is tired, let alone give compassionate and competent care. Another doctor echoed that thought by asking, would you fly across the country in a jet piloted by a man who'd not slept for almost 2 days? But there was also a doctor who said, your story was a farce. You deserve to be a reporter for the National Enquirer. And finally, about our story in the church known as The Bible Speaks, a viewer said, Pastor Stevens says he is God's man, but yet he has declared bankruptcy. The Bible Speaks, Chapter 11. I'm Morley Safer. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.
Banker is America's largest full-service real estate company. And these days, you don't get bigger unless you do it better. Coldwell Banker, the home sellers, a member of the Sears Financial Network.
Take it along for the ride. The portable breakfast from McDonald's. Your choice of 5 breakfast sandwiches.
McDonald's has a great new way to eat breakfast. Always fresh and hot. 3 kinds of biscuits or 2 McMuffins. Filled with food you'll love a lot. Since you've got places to go and things to do, grab the portable breakfast that's just right for you.
The portable breakfast from McDonald's.
It's a good time for the great taste of McDonald's.
An important message from American Airlines. Introducing American Super Sale. From now through May 20th, with fares from only $19 to $99, you can fly to destinations throughout the continental U.S. $19 to $99 each way based on round-trip coach purchase. Just make your reservations 2 days in advance and stay over Saturday. Tickets are non-refundable. American Super Sale. You may never be able to go so far for so little again.
Later tonight, after designing women, the press room becomes a war zone on hard copy. But first, there's 50% more mystery when an over-the-hill boxer backs Jessica into a corner in a special 90-minute Murder, She Wrote. Next.
Charges of child abuse.
She alleged that I sexually abused the child, my child.
Of 1.5 million allegations a year, how many are real and how many are just one more weapon in bitter child custody battles?
It's something that doesn't go away. It's with you every day of your life.
Bernard Goldberg reports tomorrow on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
This is CBS. In the West, when you had something of value, you put your brand on it. It was more than a sign of ownership. It was a symbol of pride. At U.S. West Direct, we still believe in that tradition. For over 100 years, we've published the yellow pages people depend on in the West. So chances are the yellow pages that get used around your house are the ones with our brand on the cover. U.S. West Direct, the one that gets used.
You're really on the move. So you need a bank that can keep pace with you.